When you enter Chamber 4 in Portal, there's an extremely rare chance Gladio will say,
"You're not a good person. You know that, right?"
If you have played the game long enough, you might recognize this as the soft launch dialogue from Chamber 5, which happens to be in the same map. When you reach Chamber 5, the door to the final room is already open because the soft launch trigger has already been activated. How is it possible for the soft launch trigger to activate while the player is still in Chamber 4? This strange and rare bug, known as the ghost door, has puzzled speedrunners for years. It happens so rarely that even players with thousands of hours in the game may have only encountered it once or twice. Because it's so rare, investigating was very difficult. But after hours of debugging, I finally figured out what's really going on. If a trigger can be activated by props, it usually needs a filter entity to make sure only certain types of props can activate it. For example, buttons have filters for cubes so that only cubes can press them. The soft launch trigger in Chamber 5 was also meant to be activated only by cubes. However, Valve forgot to add a filter entity for it. In older versions of the game, this meant any props could activate the trigger. Later, when Valve added the transmission received achievement, a radio was placed directly inside this trigger. Without a filter entity, the trigger activated right away when the map loaded, which looked just like the ghost door glitch. Valve noticed this issue, but instead of editing the map, they added a map-specific hack in the code. If the game detects that the current map is Chamber 4, it will spawn a filter for that trigger when the map is loaded. The only possible explanation for the ghost door glitch was that this special fix sometimes failed, causing the trigger to be activated by the radio as soon as the map loaded. That was known back in 2020, but no one knew what was the root cause until recently. To understand why, we need to look at how Source Engine handles entities. Entities live in numbered slots, and there are 4096 slots in total. Entities that need to be shared between the server and client, like props and triggers, use slots 0 to 2047. Server-only entities, like logical entities, which include the filter entity, use slot 2048 to 4095. Each entity has a handle, which is a 32-bit number. The lower 12 bits stores the slot index, and the upper 20 bits stores the entity's serial number. The map-specific hack spawns the filter entity very early in the level initialization process. In rare cases, it can appear in slot 4095, which is a valid slot. After that, the game begins pre-caching assets. Pre-caching works by iterating temporary entities of various types to load their data. The game creates a temporary entity. It assigns it to an entity slot, calls its pre-cache function, and then deletes it by passing its entity handle to the remove entity function. This function gets the entity slot index from the lower 12 bits of the handle and removes the entity in that slot index. One entity created during pre-caching is the player. The player entity has a special flag that prevents the normal entity creation function from assigning it to a slot. Players should only be created through a special createPlayer function that explicitly assigns one. Because the pre-caching process doesn't use that special function, the temporary player entity ends up without a valid slot. Its handle stays at the default invalid value 0xFFFFFFF. Despite that, the game still continues. After calling player's pre-cache function, it tries to delete this temporary player entity. Remove entity doesn't verify if the handle is valid, it just reads the lower 12 bit, which are 0xFFF or 4095 in decimal, and removes whatever entity is in that slot. This accidentally deletes the filter entity that was spawned in slot 4095 earlier. Without the filter entity, the radio activates the soft launch trigger as soon as the map loads, causing the ghost door glitch. This is likely only affects Chamber 4 because it's the only case where an entity spawned this early during the level initialization. Normally, the world is the first entity to spawn, so even if the game accidentally removes slot 4095 during caching, in every other map, there's nothing in that slot yet for it to delete. The reason Ghost Door is so rare is that the filter has to spawn specifically in slot 4095, and the slot selection isn't random. The game keeps a list of free slots for server-only entities. At first, all slots from 2048 to 4095 are available. When a new entity spawns, it takes the first free slot. When an entity is deleted, its slot goes to the end of the list. Most maps have about 30 to 50 server-only entities. This means that in the first game section, slot 4095 won't be used until around 40 to 60 level loads later. Players who don't play that long won't ever see Ghost Door. Even if you reach that point, the slots still need to be 4095 exactly when the filter spawns. If it isn't, you'll have to wait through another full cycle of map loads to get another chance. There's also a funny behavior within map-specific hack itself. Whenever you load a save in Chamber 4, the game spawns an extra filter entity, even if one already exists. If you keep saving and loading, you can stack more and more filters, and all of them are server-only entities. I made a save like this in Chamber 4 that contains around 2000 server-only entities. When loading it from a fresh game start, the next free slot number becomes 4071. Then, if we load a save at the end of Chamber 2, which allocates 24 more server-only entities, by the time we transition into Chamber 4, the next slot for the filter will be 4095. This setup will guarantee triggering the Ghost Door. The save is linked in the description. For years, Ghost Door was one of Portal's strangest mysteries. Speedrunners knew it existed, but it happened so rarely that no one could properly study it. Thanks to a deeper look into the source engine's internals, we finally know how it works. It's a great example of how one small oversight in the game can cause rare and confusing bugs. While Valve's map-specific hack worked most of the time, the perfect conditions needed for it to fail made Ghost Door one of the rarest and most fascinating glitches in Portal history. After all this time, we finally know why it happens.